It's the fifth time of the Numbers. Go over the wilderness toward to the mission land. Chapter 20, verse 9 till 13. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because of you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." These were the water of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and where he was proved holy among them. Chapter 20, Miriam's death. Continuing complaints, Aaron's death. We are now on the journey of Numbers for nearly 38 years. They wandered near Mountain Seir and in the wilderness of Zin. It can be said that it is time for 600,000 men over 20 years of age have died during 38 years of wandering in the wilderness. Here at Kadesh, Moses' sister Miriam died and was buried. And in May of the same year, Aaron died at Mountain Hor near Kadesh. And then all the first generations of the Exodus have died except for Joshua, Caleb, and Moses. 600,000 people over the age of 20 would have died. At the time, people under that age would have lived. After wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, 59 years old would be the oldest among the second generation of Exodus. At the time, Moses was 120 years old, based on Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 9, verse 7. Aaron was 123 years old, Numbers chapter 33 verse 39. And Miriam was 130 years old. And Joshua was about 93 years old, and Caleb was about 78 years old. The first generation of Exodus eventually have died in the wilderness according to God's word. Now replacement with the second generation of Exodus is the stage of chapter 20. Now then, the new generations would have been on a journey of continuing mission. But there in Kadesh, the second generation of people who return after 38 years, they complain about thirsty. Chapter 16, verse 13 to 14. To Moses and Aaron as their parents' generation. Now then, the new generation would have been on journey of continuing mission, but there in Kadesh, the second generation of people who return after 38 years, they complain about thirsty. To Moses and Aaron as their parent generation. Unfortunately, Moses make a mistake here from the beginning of Exodus. He might be so tired of people's continuous complaints that he acted and said things a little differently from God's command. But anyway, the problem of water that the people were struggling with has been solved. God forbade Moses and Aaron, who had done this, to lead them into Canaan, the land of promise. Moses' action and word would not be because he did not have a heart to love the people. He interceded for these people even at the risk of his life. He is a man who devoted himself to giving his all to God's promise. However, due to this one mistake, Moses lost the opportunity to take responsibility for leading these people to Canaan. In our lives, some mistakes are repeated, but some mistakes can result in losing everything in one mistake. If you play the role of leaders, you can make various mistakes because you are human. But as those in charge of testifying that God is alive, we should not make the mistake of misunderstanding God and turning Him into an idol. What Moses said and did because he was out of emotional control. It was an act that brought God down to the level of an idol. Leaders who act like a shaman use the power of God to reveal their power are not qualified. It was Satan worked to steal God's glory with his own glory. He must have revealed God's love by obeying His word as if one and human method work miracles. He made people misunderstand God. The staff Moses picked up here, I'm not sure if it was the one used to divide the Red Sea or Aaron's rod that budded. Some Bibles call it Aaron's rod that budded. It is also referred as the staff that Moses performed many miracles in front of Pharaoh of Egypt at the time of Exodus. But what is clear is modern English Bible, chapter 20, verse 8, take up the rod that is placed in front of the ark of the covenant and gather all the people together with your brother Aaron. So Moses brought the rod that had been placed before the Lord as the Lord had commanded, whether it was Aaron's rod that budded or the one Moses used. It was clear that it was the staff that symbolized God's living and power that was placed with the ark of God. With the staff that symbolized God's living and power, they acted as if they were performing a miracle. Even if it wasn't intentional, in the end, their action resulted in lowering God to the level of the gods in the world. Anger of the people, which is not controlled according to God's will, turns God's work into man's greed. Moses' anger in the past was a holy anger to fulfill the mission given by God. Moses' anger in chapter 20 here is shown as having the ability to judge and perform miracles as if he was God by stealing the glory of God. For this action and word, God says, "You have not honored me." God said that Moses made him like a gods of the world, the idols of the world. So, even in these days, in the church where pastor must convey only God's will and His word and action, that steal the name of the God as if they have a very special relationship with God are truly serious. All the cult leaders in the world are doing such things. I have watched it very clearly through the program called I Am God, released on Netflix currently. However, even in the Orthodox Church, when pastors mention the name of God carelessly, as if they have a special relationship with God, is sad to see what's happening. This eventually became the reason why Moses and Aaron could not enter Canaan. Leaders, including me, remember this well. In any case and at any moment, we should love people who God has asked us to take care of and to lead them where the Lord said to lead, with holy anger, service, and love, I hope that we will work together to live a life that only reveals God's glory and His love. The incident here is called Meriba, which means complaining. This happened even before they arrived at Mount Sinai in the early days of Exodus. So the place called Meriba or Massa. So the word Meriba, it was in the sense of complaining rather than a place name. And if you think about the inconvenience in the life of the mission, the community that expressed this inconvenience as complaint and dissatisfaction, it should be remembered that what happened with the Israelites we examine here. In fact, it's because people overexpress and exaggerate their words. They complain of the inconvenience of not having water. However, the words that complain of people's inconvenience as a word mixed with the various negative emotions were added. To Moses or Aaron who listened, this appeal might feel like the time when Korah and many rebelled in the past. It sounds like a very mistaken word of rebellion to deny and destroy the community. In fact, the complaints about the inconvenience that can't be helped as a person like this, even if you express it negatively, God has solved without any other discipline or judgment. But the problem is when appeal for such inconveniences in our community turn out to be complaint and dissatisfaction. It's not about letting them know the fact about the inconvenience. When provocative words and exaggerated expression containing your own annoying feeling are added, those who have to listen to it are stimulated by the word and are held by negative emotion. So the people who listen can't see the fact. They got caught up emotionally due to a misunderstanding. So rather than trying to solve the problem, it makes them react more aggressively. If you live together in a community, there will definitely be uncomfortable things. At that time, through such inconveniences, we have to look at the right reality correctly and solve the problem. It is not right to lead the entire community to quarrel and mistrust. The church has a standard that can solve such a problem. There are already promised content and method to become a community. So when problems are discovered, if we express correctly, so that the case of problems can be found through the promise made together. Such difficulties can be solved. Also, through such a crisis, it can be an opportunity to bring the community together more and more. So, in order to properly discover and solve problems without getting caught up in them, we need to clearly remind ourselves why we are going this way with this structure. Above all, it is God who has called us to this community. It was God who made this process happen. We must remember the history we have walked so far. The problem that has arisen is not a stumbling block. Rather, it will be an opportunity to become more mature by using the problem as a stepping stone. In your community, don't be a grumbler, but be a grateful person. Rather than grumble, believe in God's faithfulness and pray. become a saint who reverses adversity through obedience. A life of winning is a dangerous thing that can wear out other people and leaders and lead them all to make a mistake. Through the lesson of the text, when we encounter difficult problems, I hope that the waves of problem you can make into opportunity on the path of mission. After such incidents, they now begin their journey to the plain of Moab, east of the Jordan River, just above the Dead Sea, to go to Canaan. So Moses sent an envoy to the Edomite, telling them that they were descendants of the same ancestor, and asking them to pass through. They say they will pass by without touching anything, because the Edomites stubbornly refused and threatened. They were unable to go through and inevitably took a longer way around. But it is not sure where they chose the wilderness road that goes down to a cavern at the northern end of the Red Sea called Ezion-Geber, and goes around the country of Edom and passes to the east of Edom and the Moab, or some other way. I'll refer to the map and take a look at it in a way that can be understood. Chapter 21, Life of Marching According to the Word. So they first moved from, it seems that Israel went to the king's beloved, which they originally planned and wanted to go. But the story of Edom's refusal comes out in chapter 20. If they were rejected in chapter 20, they should go around the land of Edom and go south in chapter 22. So after winning the battle against Ararat, on the way further along the planned route, the Edomites mobilized even larger army to stop it. So they turned south and headed toward Ezion-Geber. In fact, it was because Edom was blocking the road for the Israelites. They had no choice but to return by taking a much more difficult and longer journey. In fact, it was because Edom was blocking the road for the Israelites. They had no choice but to return by taking a much more difficult and longer journey. In fact, they even defeated the Canaanite army of Arab. Israel could have continued with the victorious atmosphere and passed through the road they wanted to go through the war with Edom, but they didn't, because God didn't allow it. It should have been a long way several times. As a result of God's discipline, many people die from being bitten by a fiery serpent in the desert. When they complain about the lack of water in the Kadesh, in fact, Moses and Aaron were disciplined, not the people. Here the people are disciplined, because even if it's a little uncomfortable, it's a brotherhood. And if you think about the history of even if a little uncomfortable, it's the brotherhood. And if you think about history of Jacob and Esau, as God intended, it was okay to go back a little further. They didn't go in the direction they want to go by the fast way to be uncomfortable. In a way, it was because of complaints roots in greed. Even if you are late, please do not forget that moving on the path God has spoken is path. When I see this fiery snake incident, we must remember clearly that God is looking at the heart of the people who complain about irresistible things or greed. Are the complaint and dissatisfaction that comes out of your mouth today really coming from something irresistible or from a little uncomfortable? I hope you can think carefully about whether it is complaint that comes from the desire to be more comfortable or have more and more easily. Fortunately, even if they were bitten by a fiery serpent, God gave the way to survive. He made a bronze snake and hung it on pole. Whoever look at it, it can be cured. What does it mean? She healed them. They obeyed by part. The life of a saint is a life of faith. The Bible did not tell the story of salvation by faith in the way in the New Testament, but it was told from the beginning of the Bible. If you look at it like that, it's not that the copper snake is saving the people who are dying, because God says so. The faith that obeys the word saves. In the New Testament, this incident is often compared to the crucifixion of Jesus. This is the same principle. By believing and obeying God's promise to give salvation through Jesus on the cross, do not forget that if you believe in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God, you will be saved. Continuing to look at the contents of the text, if you refer to the Deuteronomy 2nd or number 33, Israel did not choose the way back to the south of Elath and Ezion-Geber, but passed through the land of the Edomites, the land of Moab. Here the Israelites went around the land of Edom. Whether or not the relevant passages in the Bible are slightly different. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 8 says, they went around the Edom and entered the wilderness of Moab. When explaining the entire journey in number 33, there is no mention of Elath, Ezion-Geber, or the wilderness of Moab. And they say that they left the mountain Hor and camped at Salmona. Then it would mean that they went to the road that they originally wanted to go. It is not possible to accurately verify the place name, so various predictions are made. So I'm trying to set the direction of the map as shown in the whole journey in number 33. So based on the number 33 and the area confirmed through the historical research on the actual map, they went up the Araba road again to follow the routes they originally wanted to go. Then there was a conflict with Edom. Not like that. God forbade Israel to touch Edom, his brother, and the Moab and Ammon, the family of Lot, Abraham's nephew. On the contrary, when Israel passed through their land, it seems that these tribes also did not touch Israel. So if you look at the text, there is no story of conflict with Edom and Moab. So Israel turned the direction that was heading south to the north again and passed through a place called Salmona on the edge of Edom. Called Salmona on the edge of Edom, passing through Bunon, passing through Leah-Abarim, and going to the plain of Moab through the Dibon Gad. Along this road, they passed through the land of Edom and Moab, and head north toward the plain of Moab. Even the Amorites on the way, Israel asked for mercy so they can pass through. But King Sihon of the Amorites leads an army and starts a war. So a war broke out, and Israel went further beyond the Jabbok River and occupied all the land of the Amorites. Then Og, the king of Bashan, who is further north, came out to fight Israel. They were also defeated by Israel. After all the land east of the Jordan River was occupied, they gathered in the plain of Moab, which was a key point to occupy Canaan, the land of mission. Chapter 22 to 24. Conspiracy between Moab and Midian. In this way, God leads the Israelites. When the king of Moab hears such news, he uses a tactic to overthrow Israel. Israel had already passed through the Moabites without touching them, according to God's commands. But when King Balak of Moab saw Israel's ability to completely destroy other tribes, he was afraid. They allied with the Midianites and tried to stop Israel. Because the Midianites were in an Arabian desert to the right of the Gulf of Aqaba, they traded as far north as Mesopotamia. They had very good information about the surroundings. So based on this information, the Midianites brought a man named Balaam, who was a famous fortune teller, sorcerer, Pethor, south of Carchemish on the Euphrates River. He cursed the people of Israel to prevent them from processing. God is now taking special care of these two nations. These Moabites or Midianites are rather hostile. The story of this fortune teller Balaam is up to chapter 20 to 25. It comes across several chapters. Balaam is sometimes called a prophet. Then there will be confusion with the true prophet. It is better to call the Balaam a sorcerer than a prophet. Fortune teller refers to a person who has brought the telling skill, and it is often referred to as a fortune teller. These people fortune telling and use black magic. It is said that it makes other people or enemies sick. These are superstitions and false acts that exploit people's psychology. Of course, there may be cases where it is really misused by Satan or demon, but God never works through other people's curse or black magic. In the case of Job, without God's permission, God does not allow Satan to control a person's life or soul at all. So God is ordering the people who deceive people and put them in pain to be killed. That is why He drove the Canaanites out of the land, who ruiningly did these things. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 9. When you enter the land of Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of nations here. Let no one be found among you sacrifices their son or daughter in way of nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interpret omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is medium or spirits, or who consult the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to God. Because you these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. If you go through several chapters from chapter 20 to chapter 25, there are scenes where God directly talks with Balaam, who is trying to curse Israel. However, we must discern the fact that also God does not block them because the divination and black magic performed by these people are truly effective. And now after the Tower of Babel incident, including the Canaanites, all mankind indulging in idolatry, manipulating people in ridiculous way, they lead them the way they want. They are going down the road to hell together. It is to see what the reality of this world is like. Behind all these things, greed for money and the manipulation of people. Coincidentally, the name Balaam means destroyer of the people. His purpose is to treat other people's lives carelessly in order to satisfy his own. It is same as Satan's purpose to lead to destruction through lies, curses, and anything else. So if we look at the Balaam, we can see how Satan tries to harm believers and how he tried to make them fall. In addition, it is known how God's protecting his people from such a satanic attack. No matter how much the fortune teller Balaam tried to curse the Israelites, he could not curse the people whom God directly protects and guides. Even though he built the altar of the curse 3 times, he could not curse even once. Rather, he spoke curses. Even though he built an altar of curse 3 times, he could not curse even once. Rather, he spoke of the blessed future that God said. With the future destruction of the Moab and Midian, who sought to curse and overthrow God's people, furthermore, it prophesies that all the tribe of Canaan will be destroyed. So what can we know from this fact? It is to know that God directly protects and blesses. So what can we know from this fact? It is to know that God directly promised bless His people. So what can we know from this fact? It is to know that God directly protects and blesses His people. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11. I know my thought toward you, the Lord, not calamity, but peace, thought to give you hope for the future. God stopped the curses that seek to harm His people. Rather, He keeps the promise of blessed tomorrow. Are these difficulties and confusion in your life that you feel like you have been cursed with? It's either a prepared furnace that God wants to purify you like gold, or just a forced threat from Satan. What God gives us is not disaster, but peace and hope. So if you are living a life worthy of your calling in the place God has called you, no matter what the environment and circumstances given to you are right now, do not worry. Of course, the field will not be easy and it will be exhausting, but stand boldly and go forward in faith. Then God will surely lead you to the promised land. Rather, because of the tribulation and difficulties, your spiritual discernment grows. You will also develop spiritual muscle. Therefore, do not carelessly say word without faith. Do not forget the word of faith that look at the reality that is happening in front of us through the word. If it's too tired, just take a break. You should not give up and turn around on the path of faith because it is difficult. I hope that all of you will move forward fully with faith in the faithful God. God does things that chapter 25, Israel falls into idolatry. God does things that the Israelites could not even dream of and protect them. However, in chapter 25, the Israelites snapped all the insidious temptation thrown by Balaam, the sorcerer. A serious case arises in which they commit fornication with Moabite women and fall into idolatry. Despite of the fact there is no way for Balaam, a fortune teller, to defeat the God who protects Israel. They are blinded by money, tricked into the instinctive greed and falling into idolatry. Balaam did this in chapter 25, but you can find out by referring to number 31 or the verses in Revelations chapter 2 verse 14. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. God fights to protect these people. They are in that protection, in God's protection. But they fall into the greed and lust of fornication and idolatry. The result was an epidemic that killed 24,000 people. Nevertheless, even though the whole people are weeping without even recognizing this fact, the temptation was so severe that some even committed fornication in the meantime. That's why the Levi priest Phinehas comes out and resolutely cut off the sin. This was the role of the priest and the tribe of Levi, correcting the things that do not stand right in God's word. It is to go completely on the path of the word. This is the role of the priest and the tribe of Levi, about idolizing God and about ignoring God's law and regulations and living according to the value and the trend of the word. Remember well how God determined. This generation is a generation of fashion. When the trend started in one country, it quickly spread to the whole world through the internet. Even if countless people all over the world follow the trend in an instant, if it goes against the value God has given to you, He very emphatically commanded us not to follow it. So today our saints who receive God's calling first, let's not forget that in this rebellious world we live in, we must play those roles that firmly hold the value of the God's word. It's not a life that lives according to the fashion of the world, but the life that lives according to the value of the word. Another thing, through this incident of the Balaam, we must know that Satan works very subtly. Because we know God's will, and we must understand Satan's subtle tactic of taking advantage of God's intention to drive people to death. This fortune teller named Balaam, God meets him who is nothing, reveals His will, and gives him a chance to repent. Knowing that what God forbids and hates is idolatry and fornication, He leads the Israelites into the obscene idolatry, a curse that Balaam himself could not fulfill. The people of Israel themselves did what Balaam did to trick them into walking into their pit of curse. This is exactly what Satan does. God completely protected from eternal enemy, because God can't do anything about decision without ourselves. If Satan stimulates people's greed and open their heart to his temptation, it will all come crashing down. So through the first, second, third commandment of the Ten Commandments, God first firmly said these things and continued to let us know what kind of God is, so that we do not fall into idolatry. But Balaam the sorcerer knew that God, and treated people with personalities, made them dirty their holiness by using their own power. God completely protected from eternal enemies because God can't do anything about decision within ourselves. If Satan stimulates people's greed and open their heart to his temptation, it will all come crashing down. So through the first, second, third commandment of the Ten Commandments, God first firmly said these things and continued to let us know what kind of God is, so that we do not fall into idolatry. But Balaam the sorcerer knew that God treated people with personality, made them dirty their holiness by using their own greed, because it is certain that God protects, blesses, and loves Israel. It is what made people leave God by stimulating their greed. The case of the defeat of many Christians today is not from God, but from those who have opened their heart to this kind of greed and pleasure. Today, countless pastors fearlessly do this Balaam in the church, blessing things going well. The name of God is misinterpreted, misrepresented, and skillfully deceived. It is too common for people to fall into material worship in such a way that the saints cannot possibly fathom who God truly is. They made the image of God in such a way that the saint cannot possibly fathom who God truly is. They made the image of God their own. He made it into a god of temptation and materialism that even saints can't shake off. That's why the church makes God into the gods that satisfy their greed like that. Many modern Christians misunderstand God, are caught up in the Balaam strategy, and live their lives enjoying fornication with the world. With money, fame, survival as an excuse, they are to go down the wrong path. Satan just threw the bait of greed. It wasn't forced into people's mouth. They were just throwing into their heart and mind. In the end, eating the baits and falling into the trap of greed, saying to do themselves. Not deceived by Satan because of his own greed, he himself entered the trap of greed. At that time, even Balaam, a fortune teller, could not force the Israelites to worship obscene idol. However, he only threw a bait, instinct stimulation, lust and greed, so the Israelites took it upon themselves and fell into idolatry called greed and lived an obscene life. Do not fall for Balaam's trick and Satan's trick. God was not protecting his people from Balaam, the sorcerer, and Satan. However, these people embraced Satan's bait, greed, and lust. The fight in this world is not for God to do for us, but for us to choose according to the Word. God has already fully and completely overcome Satan's life for you. The fight in the world is not for God to do for us, but for us to choose according to the Word. God has already fully and completely overcome Satan's life for us. But God is not the one who fights on my behalf. God said that because I trust in Him, I have His promises, His statutes, and His decrees. He wants us to fight and overcome Satan's greed and greed through faith. He called us with such a mission and sent us to our own land of Canaan. The Israelites have now arrived at the final attack site to enter Canaan. Still, greed always raises its head and easily pollutes the holy, distinguished people, making them secure and worldly. Looking at this fact, other words, life through and pursuit in this age. Our word, life, thought, and pursuit in this age. Let's look back carefully to see if we are caught up in greed, lewdness, and excessive greed that world is chasing after. Even in the church, we can be fully possessed by greed, lust, and the desire to be praised. Even if you become the best army, by winning victories all the ways of a plain of Moab, you can collapse right there with greed and lust. It is very important that the story of Balaam, a fortune teller, is told through the several chapters. Therefore, we must correctly understand God's will and God's intention that we want the saints to know. The scene of my life where I live today, in this world, with many temptations and traps of Satan, I hope it will be a time to deeply look back on what kind of life I should live. So I hope and pray that God calls us to live a true military life of Christ.